want to rant a little about Asians who want to be white so bad. I was having a
To the Asians that are still bending over backwards for white acceptance, what has it gotten you? You guys got rid of affirmative action, and now we are not getting into top universities at the same rate that we used to, but when affirmative action was still a thing. Our elders were getting beat up in the streets during COVID. Did you having a white husband stop that from happening to your mom?
Somebody needs to explain to me why do they think they're white?
Okay, I wish I could stitch that video, but basically that person is asking, that this person wants to know why so many Korean Americans try so hard to be white. Or in other words, why do so many Korean Americans try so desperately hard to be accepted by white people, and why do we think that we will benefit from white supremacy? And the answer is US imperialism. It's always US imperialism.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm still pissed about those Asian Americans who helped that white man get rid of affirmative action. And it didn't even benefit us in the end. Unsurprisingly. So I need Asian Americans to remember that none of this was ever built for us. The lawsuit that ended affirmative action was not started by Asian Americans. It was led by Edward Bloom, a white conservative activist who has spent years just trying to dismantle civil rights protections because that's the type of person he is. He created Students for Fair Admissions and specifically recruited Asian American plaintiffs to frame this narrative as Harvard discriminates against Asians, but this was never about helping us. It was about using us, as always, about using us to attack policies designed to create equity and level the playing field.
Did you ever notice how the model minority myth is only ever weaponized in one direction to harm Black people? When Black people are being compared to Asian Americans, then the hard work ethic and the emphasis on education are values that Asian Americans possess that Black people need to aspire to. But when white people are compared to Asian Americans, suddenly those same values are described as toxic.
For decades, they were handed a blueprint for acceptance. Work hard, be quiet, and you will be welcomed. But a blueprint is just a drawing, and the foundation it was built on was never meant to hold them. Now, an entire community is watching that promise crumble and learning a lesson Black America has been teaching for centuries.
I've seen a few comments like this with, Asians and Black people fighting in my comment section. And honestly, it shows how little we actually talk about the history behind all of this. The tension didn't just magically appear. It was shaped by decades of laws, segregation, stereotypes, and political narratives that pushed our communities apart. When Asian immigrants first came to the US, they weren't allowed to live just anywhere. Segregation forced them into Black and brown neighborhoods because those were the only areas open to anyone who wasn't white. So Asians and Black Americans were physically close, but not always connected. Different languages, different histories, limited communication, misunderstandings grew out of that. Then in the 1960s, during the Civil Rights Movement, the US created the model minority myth. The idea that Asian Americans were successful, quiet, and proof that racism doesn't exist. That stereotype was never meant to lift Asians up. It was meant to contrast Asians against Black Americans and basically say, see, they're doing fine, why can't you? It was a political tool that built resentment and pressure on both sides, even though neither community created that narrative. At the same time, anti-Blackness already existed in some Asian cultures because of colonialism, colorism, and Western media influence. And for some Black Americans, their only interactions with Asians were through local businesses, corner stores, nail salons, restaurants, situations that were transactional, not relational. That created frustration and stereotypes on both sides. But here's the thing, in both communities, it's only a small handful of people who are actually hateful or racist. A few loud, ignorant individuals do not represent millions of us. We can't let the worst examples define entire communities. Then COVID hit and all of this got amplified again. Anti-Asian hate skyrocketed. Elderly Asians were attacked, harassed, and blamed for the virus, all because of fear and political scapegoating. Some of the viral videos showed attackers who were Black, and suddenly that tiny number of incidents turned into a whole narrative online like Black people hate Asians, which was inaccurate and unfair. What people forget is that Black activists and Black organizations publicly stood with Asian communities during that time. People protested for us. They protected Asian elders. They spoke out against the hate. But the media rarely highlighted the solidarity, only the violence. And yet some Asians responded by generalizing those incidents and blaming the entire Black community, which made things even worse, even though the majority of Black people had nothing to do with those attacks. COVID didn't create new racism. It exposed what was already unaddressed and made stereotypes louder because everyone was scared and hurting. But amid all of that, we forget that historically there has also been real solidarity. Asian American activists learned organizing strategies from Black civil rights leaders. Filipino and Black farm workers united under Larry Itliong and Cesar Chavez. Japanese American activists stood with the Black Panthers. Yuri Kochiyama worked alongside Malcolm X. In Oakland, Black and Asian communities built programs together to fight poverty and injustice. These are real alliances. They just don't get talked about as much as the conflicts. That's why we need to zoom out. Like, a handful of ignorant people shouldn't define entire communities. A bad experience shouldn't turn into a stereotype. We shouldn't let old narratives and old wounds be recycled and divide us again. Asians and Black people have both faced discrimination, exclusion, violence, and being treated like outsiders. We have more in common than we think, and when we work together, there's real power, real healing, and real progress. We just have to stop letting fear, stereotypes, and misinformation talk louder than the history and solidarity we actually come from.
Did you ever notice how the model minority myth is only ever weaponized in one direction to harm black people? When black people are being compared to Asian Americans, then the hard work ethic and the emphasis on education are values that Asian Americans possess that black people need to aspire to. But when white people are compared to Asian Americans, suddenly those same values are described as toxic. Black parents are told that they need to put more emphasis on education and discipline the way Asian American parents do, but with respect to white parents, suddenly Asian Americans are abusive, authoritarian tiger parents. And black students are told that they need to study harder the way Asian American students do, but with respect to white students, suddenly it's unfair that they have to compete with the overachieving, nerdy Asian American students who lack social skills and were raised by the abusive, authoritarian tiger parents. And this is because the model minority myth is not something that was invented by Europeans about Asians. It is something that was invented in the United States about Asian Americans so that the United States could rehabilitate its reputation after the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II and to justify continued discrimination against black people. Because according to the model minority myth, what black people do is never enough, and what Asian Americans do is too much, because we live by a standard of just white.
To understand this awakening, you have to understand the bargain. The model minority myth wasn't just a stereotype. For many conservative-leaning Asian immigrants, it was a strategic identity. It was a shield crafted from the materials of hard work, academic excellence, and political quietism. The logic was seductive. If we align ourselves with whiteness by upholding its values, capitalism, law and order, traditional family structures, then our racial otherness would be overlooked. I saw this in my own family and community. There was a palpable disdain for movements like Black Lives Matter, seen as disruptive and ungrateful. We pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. The thinking went, why can't they? This mindset created a perceived ladder of belonging, with whiteness at the top, and they believed their economic success had granted them a secure spot on the highest rung they could reach. They looked at the struggles of Black Americans not as a parallel experience, but as a cautionary tale of what happens when you don't play the game correctly. Their success, they were convinced, was their permanent visa into the American mainstream.
I'm gonna rant a little about Asians who want to be white so bad. I was having a conversation with someone the other day, and she went to a gathering, right? These people are Asian, right? But there are two white guys. Someone brought the Malona ice cream. The girl, who's Asian, goes, ew, is it an Asian ice cream? And then she'd make comments like, I wouldn't know because I don't have an Asian friend. She made another comment that said something like, this feels like a whole bunch of Asians playing with two super smart white guys, playing a word game, some shit like that. It's so cringe seeing Asian people try to cater to white people. Asian people act like proximity to whiteness makes them superior. You can literally feel the energy shift when someone has internalized racism. It's this weird mix of embarrassment, superiority, and I'm not like those other Asians vibes. And honestly, it's painful to watch. I've seen it so many times. Some Asians act like the second they get a white friend group, they level up in the social hierarchy. Suddenly, everything Asian is cringe or weird or low tier. And you know what's the funniest part? They'll distance themselves from anything remotely Asian like it's toxic, and then they will over cater to their white partners or friends. Do you hear yourselves? It's like watching someone actively shrink themselves to fit into a box that was never built for them in the first place. Look, I get it, alright? A lot of Asians grow up being praised for assimilation. A lot of us are raised to believe whiteness equals safety, opportunity, acceptance. That's literally how internalized racism works. But acting like being white adjacent makes you superior to your own culture. Acting disgusted at your own food, your own features, your own background. It's not about hating anyone. It's more about calling out a pattern that harms all of us. Because when you look down at your own identity, the world learns to do the same. So yeah, Asians who think being white makes them better, just know that the rest of us see right through that.
To the Asians that are still bending over backwards for white acceptance, what has it gotten you? You guys got rid of affirmative action, and now we are not getting into top universities at the same rate that we used to, but when affirmative action was still a thing. Our elders were getting beat up in the streets during COVID. Did you having a white husband stop that from happening to your mom? Some of y'all made that shitty fusion cuisine and put strawberry in matcha, and now the white people really like it. And our food costs way too much. There's a matcha shortage. The colonizers are looking at ube now. They're trying to bulldoze Chinatowns across the nation. And your white husband is still gonna cheat on you when you have a baby and he finds a younger Asian woman. Your kid still doesn't have blue eyes. Your kid still has brown hair. What has it gotten you? What has this house servant mentality gotten you, gotten your family, gotten your community? I get that you feel better than other Asian women. I get that you feel like you're prettier, smarter, more accepted than Asian women like me who don't choose to do those things. But you're not even getting paid for waiting around in H Mart waiting to help a white person find Asian groceries. Please move out of the way. I'm trying to get my chicken feet here. Oh yeah. And what has voting for Trump personally done for you?
Then came the cracks in the facade. The COVID-19 pandemic was a brutal awakening. The very political movement many had supported, MAGA, unleashed a torrent of racist vitriol that made no distinction between the Chinese Communist Party and a Korean grandmother on a bus in San Francisco. I remember a conversation with a formerly staunch conservative uncle. He was shaken, telling me how a man had screamed at him to go back to where he came from. My uncle, a man who had spent his life believing in the Republican ideal of personal responsibility and grit, was furious and confused. "But we're one of the good ones," he said, echoing the unspoken hierarchy. We're on their side. This was the core of the dissonance. The slurs, the violence, the hatred. It didn't care about his citizenship, his tax bracket, or his vote. The viral videos of elderly Asian people being assaulted in broad daylight were a visceral lesson. To the purveyors of this hate, an Asian face is an Asian face. The shield of the model minority had shattered against the brick wall of pure, unadulterated racism.
Somebody needs to explain to me why do they think they're white?
Okay, I wish I could stitch that video, but basically that person is asking, that this person wants to know why so many Korean Americans try so hard to be white. Or in other words, why do so many Korean Americans try so desperately hard to be accepted by white people, and why do we think that we will benefit from white supremacy? And the answer is US imperialism. It's always US imperialism. Particularly migration pathways that were carved out by military occupation. So let me explain. When I was really young, my mom used to always tell me, oh, if you go to Korea, if you live in Korea, people there are gonna hate you. And I remember that confusing me so much as a kid, because why? Why would they hate me without knowing me? And so I tried to, press her for an answer, and she would just say, oh, it's for no reason. They're just jealous that you get to live in the US. Flash forward, when I'm in school or college, and I'm taking Asian American studies courses, classes in critical race studies, and I'm like, oh, I get it now. A lot of us already know the US is not this benevolent country that takes care of its citizens, let alone immigrants, indigenous people, even its own veterans. And abroad, the US terrorizes the global south through military occupation and other means, which includes Korea. You don't ever hear about or see people in Korea, Korean people in Korea, protesting US occupation, but it's there. And there's still this dream or hope of both Koreas one day reuniting or being reunified. Very generally speaking, more recent Korean immigration into the US, or maybe I should say from the 1970s onwards, these are people who have the means to. They have the money, the capital, the resources, the social connections, and maybe even more importantly, they want to. They want to come and live here. So are the people who resent the US for imposing themselves into the homeland, dividing the nation into two, and in the process separating families forever, are they going to want to uproot their lives to live in the country responsible for that pain and suffering and ultimately this loss of self-determination? Or are the people who sympathize with the US and view the country as this welcoming, benevolent nation, as the saviors almost for coming into the war, are they going to be the ones to want to move and live here? The people that immigrated are probably people who sympathized with US involvement in the war and who also subscribed to the idea of the American dream. And generally speaking, tended to be of the ruling class. And they get here, they either become disillusioned by it, the American dream, and start to question the ideas they've been told, or they hang on to it even tighter and blame other groups of people, other groups of marginalized people, for not being able to self-actualize this dream. This is just coming from my experience, observations, things that I've learned as a Korean American who has family members on both ends of the political spectrum. But, and again, I'm simplifying things a lot, but I also think that this general idea or explanation could also be applied to other East Asian and Southeast Asian communities. And if this topic interests you at all in the slightest, I highly, highly, highly recommend reading Haunting the Korean Diaspora by Grace Cho. It's a small book, but kind of heavy because it gets into some really dark stuff. But yeah, that's my answer.
As an Asian American, I know that a lot of my privilege comes from our proximity to whiteness. And with that privilege comes a certain level of protection that is not the case for everybody, particularly Black and brown folks. And so I was talking about this situation where this white woman confused me for another Asian person that she had just seen, even though we looked nothing alike. And I didn't say anything in the moment because I had just become accustomed to not really calling those things out. and not wanting to make people uncomfortable. And in doing that, I was not only suppressing my own voice, but I also wasn't using the privilege and the protection that I have. There was never any danger, physical or otherwise, that I was in, and I certainly wouldn't have been in any danger even if I had called it out. She would have just been uncomfortable probably and maybe thought twice about doing that in the future. But that's not the case for everybody in every situation, especially for Black and brown folks who call out the very real racism that they see every day. There are a lot of problems with anti-Blackness in the Asian community, and so as I am trying to, consciously relearn the way that I should handle these kinds of interactions, I'm glad that a lot of folks are rightfully calling out that it is incumbent upon me and other Asian Americans who have this proximity to whiteness and this privilege to speak out when we ourselves are not in danger in a way that other folks might be.
And this is the moment of the great, painful convergence. This is the lesson Black communities have been teaching for generations, that in a racial hierarchy, there is no right kind of minority to those committed to the hierarchy itself. There is only power and the other. The talk that Black parents have had with their children for generations, the talk about how to navigate a world that may see them as a threat, became a talk Asian parents were now having. Be careful. Be aware. Not everyone will see you as American. A Black colleague once told me with a sad smile, "You spent years trying to learn the secret handshake." I'm sorry to tell you, the club doesn't allow new members. He wasn't being cynical. He was being prophetic. The awakening for many Asian conservatives is the gut-wrenching realization that they were trying to earn a membership in a club that would never have them, while ignoring the shared struggle of those who had been protesting outside the gates all along. The very law and order they championed was now being wielded by a movement that openly questioned their right to be here.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm still pissed about those Asian Americans who helped that white man get rid of affirmative action. And it didn't even benefit us in the end. Unsurprisingly. So I need Asian Americans to remember that none of this was ever built for us. The lawsuit that ended affirmative action was not started by Asian Americans. It was led by Edward Bloom, a white conservative activist who has spent years just trying to dismantle civil rights protections because that's the type of person he is. He created Students for Fair Admissions and specifically recruited Asian American plaintiffs to frame this narrative as Harvard discriminates against Asians, but this was never about helping us. It was about using us, as always. About using us to attack policies designed to create equity and level the playing field. Now, you have probably seen a lot of people saying that affirmative action lowers the bar. Oh, DEI also lowers the bar. They're not the same thing, but people think they are. That is so misleading, and it's rooted in anti-Blackness. Also, are we noticing the percentage of white people admitted and the overwhelmingly white legacy admissions at these institutions is something that specifically never gets touched in this conversation? Why is that? Is it clicking? So here's some facts from the case. So Asian students did have the highest GPAs and test scores, but got rated lower on personal qualities by the admissions officers. And for identical profiles, Asian applicants had a 25% chance of getting in, while Black applicants had a 95% chance. And that stat gets weaponized to imply that Black students are less qualified. But affirmative action isn't lowering the standard. It's about addressing systemic inequities caused by racist policies like housing discrimination, segregated schools, and the wealth gap, etc. This is classic model minority propaganda portraying Asian Americans as proof that racism is over to justify attacking other communities. That is exactly why they ended the immigration ban against Asians in the U.S. and then only allowed in high-achieving Asians from Asia, scientists, doctors, etc., to come to the U.S. so that they could use us to prove that they weren't racist to Black people during the Cold War. I need you to pay attention to historical context about how this has all gone down. History is rhyming. It's the same thing. Here's the thing. I want to say that 69% of Asian Americans actually support affirmative action, and advocacy groups like Chinese for Affirmative Action and CIRAC fought to keep it. The loudest anti-affirmative action voices do not represent all of the Asian community. They do represent a narrative designed to divide us, though. And for Asian Americans, especially young Asian Americans, I need you to hear me. Even though many in our community do not align with the model minority nonsense, I can attest to that being true, the ones who do are often the ones that get the most visibility because playing that role perpetuates white supremacy. And at the end of the day, we have to be real about all of this. None of this was ever for us anyways. This country literally had laws banning us from being here. We have always been seen as outsiders. We have only ever been used as a tool, a wedge to uphold white supremacy, and then they will scapegoat us the second they need to. That has always happened in times of sickness, war, and a loss of jobs. And it is on us to disrupt that role, to stop aligning with anti-Blackness, and to refuse to be used as puppets for systems that were never built for us anyway. It is imperative that we, as Asian Americans, learn our history, learn how we've been used, understand it, and choose solidarity. Because if we're not fighting these systems together, we are always on the chopping block. Remember how they treated us during COVID. Until next time, y'all.
I'm mad at Asian Americans because why are we so smart but so silent? What's with the silence? I suspect that if we opened our mouths, we would side with Black people and other brown people as the real American heroes. Yeah, we're brown, not white. But this would disrupt the white supremacy brainwash we're caught in. And deep down, we hate ourselves for siding with whiteness. We know they're wrong. Our silence is the sound of us hating ourselves. But that's the Squid Game trap that they set for us, an Asian American matrix that messes with our reality. And it's all based on hating Black people. You know, the ones we're all secretly trying to copy, even the white peoples. White supremacy isn't smart, but it's tricky like that. You like being tricked? I don't know any Asians who put up with that. We gotta decolonize ourselves and find Asian joy. Therein lies our voice.
The journey from a conditional belonging to a conscious solidarity is a painful but necessary one. It requires dismantling the myths you were sold and the ones you sold yourselves. So here's the challenge, regardless of your background. Interrogate your proximity to power. Ask yourself, are the political alliances you uphold based on a genuine shared humanity or on the fleeting promise of protection from a system that was never designed for you? Have that difficult conversation within your family and community. Read the history you've avoided. True safety was never going to be found in a bargain. It can only be built in a coalition that recognizes our shared fate in the fight for a truly inclusive America.